going forward, try this. So I believe that it's very possible to understand what makes that person move within the first 5 minutes of talking to them. And I call it bridge questions. And the idea is that you start with a question already knowing that your intent is to ask a specific question. And that specific question is, how much do they have in their current checking and savings, right? It's very powerful to understand that number. Right up after the intro, where an LO would normally say, how can I help you? Switch it up and say, before I begin, let me just ask a few basic questions before I complete this call so that I can confirm if I can even benefit you. If I can, I'll show you what I can do. If not, I'll at least point you in the right direction. This is where you take over, control the conversation, and you figure out exactly what makes a move. You say, outside of the current mortgage, what other debts do you have? Let's start with revolving debt. How much total in credit cards? Just a rough estimate is fine. And usually you're gonna get an answer of like $5,000 all the way up to like 25 to 30. Make sense? So $5,000 is probably someone who knows how to manage their money, and I'm already knowing that I'm gonna have a different conversation than someone who has over 30 grand in credit card debt.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
You said monthly obligation or total debt obligation?
Total debt.
Total debt. That's the 5, and I have 25,000 in credit cards.
Correct. So basically, outside of the mortgage for your home on Myford, because you already see their address, right? What other debts are you currently obligated to? Let's start off with revolving debt. What's the total amount in just credit card debt? Rough estimate's fine. And that's where you're actually identifying who you're talking to. The person who's emotionally tied to the number, because they're gonna say like, hey, I think we owe, or I don't know, maybe around. That's not the person tied to the number. Right? Whereas the person who says, I got about 30 grand, like spot on confidence in their tone, that person's tied to the number. So I know that that person needs to be there. Makes sense at the time of pitch. But when they give you the answer, whether it's 5 or 25, say, okay, great. So besides your mortgage payment, how much do you send just in credit card payments? Rough estimate's fine. And then this begins the bridge questions. So let's say they say, I don't know, about 300. It should immediately be followed up with, is that the minimum, or are you paying more than what is due? Why do you think that's important?
Because if they're sending more, they want to pay it off faster. If they're making the minimums, then they're strapped.
Yes, exactly. You see the difference, guys?
Yeah.
Usually they'll say that's probably a little bit above the minimum. Say, okay, great. And then outside of the credit cards and the mortgage, do you have any installment loans like equity lines of credit or like vehicles or student loans? Or you say, yeah, I got a couple, blah, 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 blah. What do you send? So I send this much. Again, is that the minimum or more than due, right? So you're already kind of getting, and this is within 3 minutes of the conversation. Make sense? And say, okay, so outside of that, what we like to determine is what is called a net. So your net income is after your gross pay, but net is after all your bills are paid from your net income. And I always like to use the time of the month, right? So like saying, so for example, now that we're going into March, how much of February's net income followed you into March? Make sense? They'll always come out with some outlandish number, like $2,000. But that is the ultimate bridge to say, great, if you're putting $2,000 a month inside your bank account every month, how much do you currently have in checking and savings? And that's the buzzer, right? That's the money button. Because then they're gonna say, I have about 4 grand or 5 grand. And say, I see. So based on the figures you shared with me, that's basically 1 month of mortgage payments that you have in your account, less than 1 month of living in your account. And they're gonna say, yeah, okay, now you got them. And say, okay, well, before I go any further, let me just verify a few things with regards to income. Now I'm starting to slide in questions on the 1003. But from there, I already know where to go. Make sense?